after you finish visiting every country in the world, what happens when a new country pops up? Well, fortunately, this doesn't happen very often. Fortunately, a new country only comes around generally every 5 to 7 years or so. Since I've been doing this, there's only been one new country that has popped up, as you said, and that was South Sudan. And so I actually went to South Sudan last year, and then I went to Sudan proper as well. So I went to both of those. Countries often declare their independence or their autonomy, usually a region or part of the country does, but it's not necessarily recognized, by the global community. So I'm fortunate that the list doesn't really keep growing, maybe every 5 to 7 years. But if it happens in the future after I'm done, I'm not sure. I guess it depends on what country it is. Yes, sir.
I haven't gotten your book yet, and I'd like to, but I was wondering if you could speak to the resilience of the process. I imagine it's, for some people, it's intimidating to read about all the success stories. Can you say anything about the trial and error, or the successes and failures, and the resilience of the folks who came through?
Yeah, great question. He asked, can I say anything about the resilience of people in the study? And he said, we often hear success stories, but we're kind of intimidated by them. And what about stories of things that don't work out? Great question. And I love that word resilience. People often ask, what are the common characteristics of people who started these kind of businesses? And I really like the word resilience because most of them are fairly persistent, and most of them are fairly curious, and most of them, or at least many of them, will have multiple iterations of their project, and that's totally normal, and that's fine. Did you have?
Yeah. Did many of them go through a series of failures before they reached a success?
Some of them did. Some of them went through some failures, and I think a key component of the model is reducing risk. So the whole thing is to me, a failure is, borrowing a very large sum of money, for an unproven idea, waiting a long period of time, with uncertainty, and then, starting and finding out that the response wasn't so great. And in my mind, if you start something fairly quickly and you don't spend a lot of money, if it doesn't work out, I don't think it's a failure. So a lot of people did that, and there were different iterations, and there were people who, maybe started something and didn't get the response they wanted, so then they either tweaked that or started something completely different. But I don't think failure is a prerequisite to success. I do want to say, I think people often want to hear a lot of failure stories, and I would say a lot of people are just successful from the beginning. Failure is overrated. If you fail, then there's no reason why you can't succeed later. Yes, over here.
Could you say something about websites? Thousands of dollars, WordPress. What's your advice?
Did I say something about websites? $10? No, it depends on what kind of website you're trying to make. You can get a very basic, cheap website for free, or less than $100. A domain name should cost no more than $10. I do believe, that said, for those who are existing business owners, I do believe it's important to invest, in your business as it grows. I think as you have something that's working, I think it is good to go back and kind of invest in it. And in my mind, design and infrastructure is a great thing to invest in. However, when you're getting started, I don't necessarily think that you need to spend a lot. There's one story I'll tell you, and we'll do another couple questions. There's a guy in the book, Gary Leff, and Gary is CFO in Arlington, Virginia, for a university. And he likes his job. He's relatively happy, in this job. But he's also always been very passionate about traveling the world, just as I am. And Gary's always used his miles to travel in first and business class with his wife. And his colleagues have always been very jealous of this. So he's always helped them, for free to put their trips together. So a couple of years ago, Gary decided to create, a very basic website offering this service. It's called BookYourRewards.com. So he's offering this service of consultation, on other people's itineraries, and he's willing to call the airlines on their behalf and all that. The service costs $250, per itinerary. It takes Gary about 1 hour a day to do it, and this side business now earns more than $100,000 a year. So I mentioned this story for 2 points. One, because the website was extremely basic and still is. The website really needs some design love, but it doesn't matter, in this case. And then secondly, I mentioned that story because people often ask about, what if I have a job and I'm happy to, Gary's whole position is, I like my job just fine, I have no plans to quit, but I also like the fact that I go there because I want to, not because I have to. And I like the fact that if something changed in that environment, it wouldn't be a problem at all for me, to kind of walk away and pursue the other thing. It's a great question. Yes?
So thank you for being here. So you're married, you're writing a book, you write on your blog, World Domination Summit. Do you have any strategies that you would share to help other people keep focused on what your top priorities are?
Great. So doing lots of things, and how do I keep focused on that? Strategies for it. My wife is looking at me. Actually, did you ask if I was married? You have something to say?
I was just curious how you're planning.
She's curious. Everyone just gets really Guillebeau over here. I guess. So I don't like this phrase life-work balance very much. All right. In my view, life-work balance, this is something that corporations came up with to make their employees think that they're happy. And if you're focused on life-work balance, then something's either wrong with your life or your work, in my opinion. However, there's still a principle here, so I guess I like the word alignment. And I want to be in alignment. I want to have good relationships. I want to have good relationships, and I want to do good work. And something that helps me, a practical tip that helps me, I try to focus very much on deliverables, and I focus on outcomes, as opposed to focusing on time commitments or other things that are kind of irrelevant to the work that actually needs to get done, right? So in my case as a writer, I'm focused on writing books and blog posts and guest pieces, I'm focused on creating products, on the travel thing, on this World Domination Summit, other projects that we do, but I try to always think, okay, what's the outcome for this? What needs to happen, for this outcome to be achieved? And then I kind of work backwards from there, as opposed to saying, okay, 3 hours a day I'm going to be working on this task or whatever. It doesn't matter how much time you put into something. What matters is what's, created at the end. Let's see. Is there any women who have questions? I'm sorry. Hi.
It really strikes me about these times about you when you're doing something and I think it's very challenging for people to be able to and I wanted to just comment on that.
That's a great question. For those who didn't hear, she was asking about bravery. She said something, I'm probably going to paraphrase it incorrectly, but something about these times in which we live and inspiring people to live bravely, and perhaps some of the choices that I've made or some of the choices that you heard about tonight were brave. I'm not necessarily, I kind of associate brave choices with risk. And when I think about self-employment, I honestly and truly believe that for many of us, self-employment is the safe choice, and it's in many ways the conservative choice. And so for me, it is a question of security. And at least for me, I would be a terrible employee. Why would I entrust? First of all, why would I entrust my future, to someone else? I don't know that it's a brave choice, to do that. That's the first thing I would say. But I guess I would also say when people, go through times of change and transition. Especially people, who made those choices independently, as opposed to someone who's kind of forced to make a choice. I do find that great, and I find myself inspired. When I hear a story of someone who says, it's very hard to find someone, who had a job that was fairly decent, but it wasn't what they wanted, so they took dramatic steps, to achieve it, to break away from that. So whenever I there's stories like that, and I'm inspired by that. I mean, Sean Ogle is here with us tonight. I wrote about Sean in my first book, The Art of Nonconformity. And Sean had a job as a financial analyst, his first real job, out of college, and he hated it. Is that fair to say? Fair to say, he hated it. So Sean really did take some deliberate, steps to kind of walk away from that and create his own freedom. And a lot of other people have done that too. But I would say overall, I don't know if what I'm doing is brave. Thank you. Yes.
So I have not been to your website, so can you tell us a little bit more prior to writing the book, how similar to you?
Sure. Great. Prior to writing the book, how did I make money? So, as I mentioned, I was a terrible employee, basically unemployable. And from a young age, I guess about 20, I was motivated to kind of strike out on my own and do whatever I could, legally and morally, to pay the bills. Wasn't so strategic about it in the beginning. I did lots of different internet businesses, website design. I sold coffee on eBay, did some importing, did some consulting, just like a hodgepodge of things to kind of support myself and then Jolie as well. Then we lived overseas for about 4 years, from 2002 to 2006 in West Africa. Moved back to the States, and that's when I wanted to start a career as a writer. And I didn't necessarily have an aspiration to create products or make money from my website. I did want to write a book, but I didn't know how that worked. And so since 2008, I've essentially been building the community, The Art of Nonconformity, the first book, and now the second book. Thank you. Yes, we'll cycle back around there.
So you spoke about how being employed for yourself makes kind of no sense. And I sort of went on business about 6 months ago because I couldn't find a job after moving down here from Alaska. And I think what I was most surprised about is how many people, even those who had been in business for themselves, just immediately assumed that I would be an abject failure right off the bat. You know, people are just like, because of the tough economy and all this stuff. And people's inability to understand that just sitting and doing nothing is also really, really risky. Just sitting and thinking this job is going to open up and fall in your lap, and you're not perceiving the risk of either having a job you can lose tomorrow and all your eggs are in that basket, or just hitting home with like unemployment and all this stuff. So what do you say to the naysayers, those people who can't really understand the true risk assessment?
What do I say to the naysayers who can't understand the true risk assessment? I don't say anything to them. They're not my market. There's a very big market of amazing, awesome people who are all interested in change and want to do exactly what you've done. So congratulations. You know, you didn't hear she started her business 6 months ago. She said everyone around her, even some other business owners, sorry about that, even some other business owners told her she was going to be a failure. You know, and so congratulations on forging ahead. What is your business?
I'm an attorney.
You're an attorney? Do you have a website or anything?
I do.
What is it?
It's my name. It's really long. www.kayana.com.
KayanaBradleyLaw.com. I was trying to get you some readers or subscribers. That is actually harder than ChrisGuillebeau.com. Probably like one person here got it. That's great. Congratulations. Thanks. In the back.
Yeah. So apologies for what might be a little bit of a long question. I just had like one that I wanted to... Yeah, medium. We'll go medium.
Okay.
So my name's Graham. I run a business in town. It's called Float On. We do float tanks, sensory deprivation tanks. And I also run a small business workshop in town called Cake. And my question is, I get a fair amount of questions, actually, and this is one I don't know how to answer, from people who come into our small business workshop, which is, how do you know when you're starting something small, like at $100, let's say, and you build it up, and you eventually want to throw as much money into this business as possible, but at the same time you want to live and you want to start paying yourself a decent wage. And how do you decide what point you take more money for yourself and at what point you're just like full blast into the business, let's grow this thing as much as you can, like, where's the balance there?
Great question. What point do you invest versus not investing? You know, your business is starting off well, you want to pay yourself, but then how do I decide investing? That's a great question. It's Graham, right?
Yeah, Graham, exactly.
Okay, yeah, thanks for tweeting, and I saw you brought some folks out. So
yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely.
At what point do you decide? Well, you decide based on the results. You know, you decide based on how things are going. It's a very good situation to be in. You know, when the project is starting to take off, you do have sales and revenue or clients or customers or whatever. That often is a good point, you know, to invest in the business. But even investing in the business, you know, quote unquote, you know, it still doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You know, at that point, it's more like a strategic decision. You know, and it's up for you contextually or anyone else to figure out what does that mean, how much money here, how much money there. I actually got this question by email either today or yesterday, and I'm going to probably get the numbers, I'm probably going to get the exact numbers wrong, but it was something like, you know, we started this project and it's on track. We started it for less than $1,000, and it's on track to earn $40,000, you know, in its first year. Like, great, wonderful. You know, we're debating this really big decision over, you know, whether to make an additional $1,000 investment. And I was like, you know, actually, I don't usually like to give specific advice, but on this case, just spend $1,000. You know, it's going well. Yes.
I'm all for bootstrapping, and I was wondering how you deal with legal fees and accountants when you are worried, like you just skip it and hope you do it.
Great question. How do you deal with legal fees and accounting fees and things like that? Oh, great. Well, it obviously depends on the kind of business you're starting and the industry you're in. The guy who was going to start his own dental practice, he probably needed like a fair amount of insurance. Most of us, on the other hand, really don't have to pay a lot of those fees, at least in the beginning. You know, you can get a business license online, you know, from the state of Oregon or Washington or whatever, $50 or less. You know, you can get anything else you need kind of as you go along, you know, and I don't think it does have to cost a lot. In fact, I really feel like in some ways it's always tricky because you don't want to tell someone not to plan or not to worry about those things, but I feel like when you're thinking about starting a business, the far more important questions to ask are like, where is my revenue going to come from? Who are my clients? You know, how am I going to sell? You know, and how am I going to increase sales once the business is going well? Those are by far the more important questions than things like, you know, how can I get the capital I need to start the business? And what are all these different like registrations and things to do? So I don't mean to say they're irrelevant. I would just say they're not central, you know, to the lifeblood and the planning of a small business, especially a very small business that's being run by one person. Don't sue me if I get that wrong.
How did you sustain yourself when you were traveling? Did you already have like a lot of money? How did you?
Sure.
And how did you start?
And how did I what?
Start traveling.
How do I start traveling? Okay, great. So questions about traveling and earning income. I run my business from all over the world. Wherever I go, I'm always working. I spend a fair amount of time working wherever I am, and I kind of carve out time to do that. I have found that it's much easier to kind of maintain an existing business than it is to start a new business while traveling. So I often encourage people who are, you know, have this desire to kind of take off for a year or to become location independent or whatever. I do think it's much easier to kind of begin the project, you know, and then maintain that on the road than it is to kind of continually start it. But that's been my experience. As for travel, well, I mentioned that we'd lived overseas for a number of years. I had been to maybe 40 or 50 countries at that point and realized, like, I would love to go to 100 countries, you know, one day in my life. And so I started working toward that goal, and I realized it was a relatively easy goal. You know, like you can pick and choose your countries, only go to easy ones. Canada, check, you know. We're going on a cruise in the Caribbean, like 4 countries, awesome. But then, so I realized, like, what would be a more challenging goal? So I think it was in 2007 or 2008 that I set the goal of visiting every country in the world, and I've been working on it ever since, about 5 years.
How did you knock out 4 then? Like,
well, it wasn't a question of knocking out. It was living for 4 years in Africa and then working across borders and, you know, and then traveling a bit in Asia and traveling a bit in Europe. So it's kind of a progression. It's like a 10-year progression. Yeah. Let's do a few more questions. Yes, sir.
You address a model for entity structure. Should you need to protect your assets?
You need to protect your assets, you said. I recommend protecting both your assets and your assets, but I don't really address so much entity structure. That'd be a great question for this person in the front row. I personally operate as a sole proprietor. Yes.
When you were starting out to write this book, how did you advertise that you wanted to collect all these stories around the world?
Yeah, great question. When I started writing the book, how did I get the word out about recruiting stories? It honestly came about very organically in the beginning, and then we got more strategic. In the beginning, you know, this community, the Art of Nonconformity community, was growing, and I was hearing lots of fun stories from people who were sharing their own histories of how they had started these businesses. And then I went on my first book tour. I went to all 50 states, every province in Canada, and many of the stops, I met these people, or I met people who knew someone, you know. And so that's when I thought, like, okay, the next project is I want to tell these stories and, again, craft a narrative around it. So from there, we started with blog posts. We started with other friends of mine who are authors or bloggers. You know, they put out posts. We created a Google Doc, and people could submit their info. And then that's where we had the screening process, and then went down from there. But it was all very basic, and the word just kind of spread. I did use HARO, which is helpareporterout.com. It connects journalists and sources. So I did kind of do a little thing there. Maybe 15 to 20% of the stories came from that. But most of them just came from people who were nominating themselves or nominating someone else, and then we had an interview process from there. Yeah, a couple more questions? I'm sorry. I see everywhere. Yes, sorry.
Hi. You talked a lot about to create your own work and get to combine your passion with the talents you already have. But I joke that I'm a good enoughness. Like, I like to try a lot of different things until I'm like, okay, that's good enough. And then I move on to the next thing. So how do you either pick your passion or find your passion?
She said she was a good enoughness. Yeah, like a generalist, and not necessarily. Right. Where's Emily Wapnick? This is what Emily does. She has this whole project. I'm probably going to say it. Can you stand up and say what it is? She answers this because her whole project is all about answering this question.
I say that there are ways that you can combine your interests, and you can kind of find like a nice little intersection that's sort of like your own niche, but it allows you to do multiple things. It's more like a theme than like one.
That's great. And Emily, is it EmilyWapnick.com, or do you have another domain?
It's just
HuddyLike.com. So you should all go and check out that website. I agree with Emily. I think probably the wrong answer would be to kind of narrow down and say I can only do like one thing, and I'm not an individual who likes a lot of different things. I really think it's important to create convergence. Now, it all has to be useful. It all has to be helpful and interesting to other people, but I do believe most of us can create something like that. Yeah. Okay. One final question.
I have a comment.
You have a comment?
Yeah.
Is it a good comment or a bad comment?
It's a good comment.
All right.
I just...
This is a bad review. I don't know if I want it.
It's a good review. I highly recommend the book. I couldn't put it down. And I think the undercurrent that I saw in it is like, what are you waiting for? I almost could feel like Chris was shouting, what are you folks waiting for? Get up and get going. And I like the part where you said, you do not need to get permission. Just do it. Live your own dream. And what kind of legacy are you going to leave? That was so inspiring to me. And I thank you for it.
Thank you so much for the good review.